Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 Suicide Prevention and Annual SAPR Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Trainings. This is the Tier 1 training, and you all know that that's the appropriate place for you to be because I can see based on your ranks and the uniforms that you're wearing that you're in the right place. So thank you for coming today. I'm Jim Harper. I'm going to be your host and guide through the next hour and a half of time. And we have a lot of slides and a lot of information to cover in that hour and a half, but this is still supposed to be and is much better if it's an interactive training. So if we have conversation, it will make the training go significantly better for everyone here. And so a little bit about myself. How many of you have had a training from me before? A couple of you, most of you. So a little bit about myself. I am the full-time GS prevention analyst in the Violence Prevention Office over at the ARC. And on drill weekends, I'm a senior master sergeant in medical as a traditional reservist, as the flight chief for mental health. That's a little bit about my sort of resume and bio, but what you might not know about me is that I live in my car. Okay, I don't actually live in my car, but I spend on average 4.5 to 5 hours every day in my car because I have an incredibly long commute and I have a very active 13-year-old daughter who's engaged in lots of things, so it's going from point A to point B to point C. And so spending 5 hours a day in my car, I could really, really hate being in a car. And it's probably not appropriate to joke about it because there are people who do live in cars. In fact, when I was 13, my mother fled our physically, sexually, and psychologically abusive stepfather, and my sister, who's 15 at the time, me at 13, and my mother lived in a car for about 2 months. So I have a complicated relationship with spending time in a car. In fact, I was in middle school, 13-year-olds in middle school, so I wore my sister's hand-me-down clothes, lived in a car, didn't get to shower as often as I should have as a 13-year-old boy, so you can imagine I was hugely popular in middle school, right? And so because of that, you would think that I would hate being in a car. You would think that the 5 hours I spend every day in the car going to and from work and to and from the places that I need to go to would be frustrating, that I would hate the constant construction, that I would hate the terrible Texas drivers. Yes, Texas drivers were terrible. That I would hate all of the bad traffic. I would have my white knuckles on the steering wheel and be cursing and giving the one-finger salute to everybody that passed me by. But the truth is, I consider those 5 hours a day in the car that I spend to be a blessing. They're an opportunity for me because every one of those 5 hours I spend in the car, or at least most of those minutes, I spend with my 13-year-old daughter. And I have a rule in my car. When you get in for 15 minutes, the 15-minute rule is no devices, no earbuds, no reading, no nothing, you're talking to dad. You can imagine my 13-year-old daughter loves that rule, but actually it gives us time to sort of bond and connect in a way that I might not have ever been able to do with my daughter if I didn't have these many minutes every day in the car with her. So even though I was homeless in a car for 2 years as a 13-year-old, and even though I spend all that time with terrible Texas drivers in the car right now, I love my car time because it gives me an opportunity to do things that I might not otherwise be able to do. So I use that car as a tool to get from point A to point B, but I also use it as a way to increase and improve my relationship with my daughter. Now, it's a 10-year-old, 200,000-mile Mazda 3. I'm a tall guy. It's not very comfortable. It's not a smooth ride. It's kind of loud. So I would love to, buy a nice luxury sedan with a smooth ride and a great sound system. That would make my commute a lot better. But the truth is, in this 5 hours a day that I spend with my sister or with my daughter in the car, she told me a lot of stuff. And one of the things she told me is she wants to go to TCU to get her undergraduate degree. And I looked online, and a TCU undergraduate degree costs about $500,000. Now, I'm not kidding. I did not make that up. $460,000 for a 4-year TCU undergraduate degree. So I'm not going to be buying any new luxury car that's got a nice sound system anytime soon if I'm going to be paying $500,000 for my daughter's college. But again, it's a blessing. I don't curse the fact that I'm in a loud, bumpy car because I get that time with my daughter. Now, why am I telling you about my car? You don't care. This is a suicide and SAPR training. You're like, what is he talking about his car for? The reason I'm telling you about my car is because my car is a metaphor for this training and for our Air Force experience when it comes to interpersonal and self-directed violence. My car, I could be angry and white-knuckled about it. I could come to this training and be like, oh God, I've got to teach my 400th training. I hate this training. It's me saying the same things over and over again, looking out at a blank stare to the audience who are like, what are you saying, man? Or I could say, this training changes our Air Force culture. This training is the way that we put me out of work because I never have to do it again, because 10 years from now, there's no sexual violence in the military, in our Air Force. 10 years from now, there's no deaths by suicide in our Air Force. That's why I come to this training. Not because my sister attempted suicide once while we were living in the car during that time, and a couple of other times over her adolescence. Not because I'm a survivor of sexual violence, but because this is an important thing that we do. And we can come into it with an attitude of, I hate this place, God, just get it over with. Or we can come to it and say, you know what? This is a blessing. This is an opportunity for me to go back from this class and take what I learned in this class to make my environment better, to make my workshop better, to make the Air Force a better place, so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, my kid, my brother or sister, my uncle, whoever, can join that Air Force, and it will be a safer, healthier Air Force for them. That's why I do this training. That's why I told you about my car, because it's not just a car. It's also an opportunity. And this training is not just a training. It's an opportunity for each and every one of us in this room to go out, make our Air Force better, and keep ourselves safe from suicide and from interpersonal violence like sexual assault. So can everybody agree with me, at least for the next 80 minutes, we're going to have a positive, proactive attitude about the training, and we're going to look at it as a way that we can take the tools we learn here and put them into action in our Air Force down the road. I saw a nod, so we're going to consider that a yes. Thanks for going on this journey with me, and we're going to get started. I already told you about myself. We're going to do a disclaimer here shortly. This is a congressionally mandated statement. I have to read it out loud to you. I'm going to read it really fast, but that doesn't mean it's not important just because it's fast, okay? We're talking about suicide, and this topic may be difficult to discuss. Some of you may have had personal experience with suicide, and it may be difficult to participate. At any time, feel free to take a few moments for self-care or ask for help if you are having difficulty. We want open dialogue, but we also want to remain respectful of those around us. Even if you do not have personal lived experience, someone in this room may. Statements should be respectful at all times. All right, this is a small group, but we're still going to try to do this activity for a moment before we move on. And all this activity is, it's the simplest thing. It's something you do every day, but I want you to be intentional about it and do something that connects you to the people in the room with you. Think of a time in your mind right now when someone asked you, are you okay? Are you doing okay? Is everything all right? It doesn't have to be a big, oh my goodness, I'm having really dark thoughts and thinking about suicide kind of thing. It can be just any time in your life when someone said, are you okay? And it made a difference to you. It made an impact on your life. Think about that, get that time in your mind, and then I'm going to give you 2 minutes to talk to your neighbors and share those experiences. So we're going to start that time now, and I'll come and talk to you, and you guys can sort of make a group over there. All right? 2 minutes, let's go. So my daughter that I was talking about, I have been having some work stress lately because of a lot of change and things happening at work. It's been good, but it's also been stressful. And my daughter, in the car the other day just said to me, are you doing okay, Dad? Is he really stressed out? You're like not your usual kind of self. And it did a couple things. One, it made me feel cared for and loved, but two, it also reminded me, and people see what you do, and my 13-year-old kid can tell that her dad is stressed out about work, and I want to create that in my daughter's life. So it really helped me get more perspective and think again about what I want to do. How about you?
I went home over the Thanksgiving break.
Where's
in
home?
Tennessee.
Okay.
Nashville. And I saw some people that I hadn't seen in a really long time, and some family members. And I've been dealing with stuff here at work, some health problems that I'm going through, and that had been stressing me out too, kind of like the same situation. And I guess it was just like radiating off of me.
Yeah.
And someone I hadn't seen in forever was like pulling me aside. It was like, hey, your energy is, you're not all happy-go-lucky. So I was like, I haven't seen this person forever. They're so far removed from the situation, you can still tell.
Yeah.
Over time.
That's a really good story, and if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit of that when we come back together. All right, so time is up, and we had a good discussion, and I'd like to ask if there's anyone in the room who came up with the moment when someone asked if they were okay and it made a difference, if they would like to share with the rest of the group. Is there anyone? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go ahead.
Thank you.
So, I went home for Thanksgiving, home being in Tennessee, and saw some family members that I hadn't seen in a really long time. It'd been years I hadn't seen them. And I've been dealing with some stuff here at work, some health problems. I've been in and out of the hospital. And them not seeing me in so long, like it never got brought up, but they could tell that, something had been bothering me and that I wasn't my usual self, even from when they remembered me back then. And, it was weird at first, somebody saying, hey, are you okay? It's someone who is in my life but isn't in my life. But just knowing that I was radiating that, hey, something wasn't right, and they knew it and asked, I was like, hey, it felt good seeing that someone who I hadn't seen cared enough to be like, hey, are you doing all right? We haven't seen each other, but I can tell something's wrong. Are you good?
Thank you so much for sharing that, Aaron Welton. I really appreciate it. And there's so much good stuff there that we're going to probably go back to that a couple times over the course of the training, because not only is it a good story of someone asking if you're okay when you need that support, but that you said you were radiating it off of you. People could tell even though they hadn't been around you. And that's something that this training is about. This training is about using your gut and being perceptive and picking up on when people around you may be struggling. And so thank you for sharing that. And I think it's an excellent example of what we can do. And you sort of alluded to it, that it made you feel as though you were heard, and it made you feel as though the experience that you were going through was valid, to have someone see it and check in with you about it. And that's what this really is about, right? I'm sure the other people in the room who had this conversation as part of this connection activity had the same sort of thought, that when someone checks on you with an authentic care and concern, it makes you feel better. And there's brain chemistry reasons for that. It releases endorphins and oxytocin and good feel-good chemicals in your body. But more than that, it makes you feel seen and heard and understood when someone actually authentically looks at you and says, is everything okay? Because I want you to know that I'm here for you if it's not. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate you taking the time. And this is just another way that we get connected to one another, and something that you can take out, because it took us, 5 minutes total, maybe less than that, to do this activity. You can take it back to your shops and use it with the people around you as an activity, or just use it to help recognize the importance of checking in with people and making sure that they're okay. All right. So here are course objectives in Air Force training. So in all Air Force trainings, I tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I tell you, then I tell you what I told you, right? So this is what I'm going to tell you. We're going to talk about risk factors and warning signs and distress. We're going to talk about prevention and intervention. We're going to talk about certain behaviors and how to intervene when needed. And we're going to talk about, this is relatively new for suicide prevention specifically, the importance of time-based prevention and the go slow model. This has been in the training for a couple of years, but this year it's more forefront. And ultimately then we're going to identify some strategies that increase connectedness and coping skills. All right, so start off, let me ask you a simple question. Is all stress bad? Would your life be better if you lived a life with zero stress? What do you think? I see a lot of people shaking their heads. Why would you say no, Sergeant Pena?
I feel like stress kind of just puts things in perspective for you. It kind of drives you to do what you do.
Yes, it can motivate you. It can get you sort of off the couch to do something, right? And it's not rocket science. Dr. Short sort of put together this bell curve about stress level and performance, but hypostress, which is too little or no stress, is actually a bad thing for human beings, right? Because it makes us inactive, understimulated, bored, or dissatisfied. We're depressed. We might be anxious because we're not doing more. And stress is not a bad thing. In fact, stress is a good thing. 300,000 years ago, saber-toothed cat jumped out at early humans. You needed stress in your life, right? Because it flooded your body with endorphins. It's flooded your body with chemicals that would increase your muscular firing speed, that would dilate your pupils, give you more focus. so you could fight or flee, hopefully not freeze, and get out of there and live. Well, so now we don't really have saber-toothed cat jumping out at us as something that would create that sort of brainstem level stress response, but stress is still a real significant part of our everyday life. And enough stress, the right amount of stress, the optimal level of stress is in green here, and you see right where that blue heart is, it's called eustress, which is the optimal level of stress. When you have enough stress to be focused, to be energized, to be creative. But if we get too much stress and it starts to build up, and we get overloaded on stress, we can get to a place on the far left, your right of the screen, where we get to distress. And that's where there's so much stress in our environment that our coping skills, our natural coping strategies can no longer help us deal with that stress, right? Because everybody has coping skills, everybody has coping strategies. Some are healthy, some are less healthy than others, but everyone has things they do to help deal with stress. Once our body has used up all those resources, our people around us that help with stress, our hobbies that help with stress, then we get into distress, and it can lead to exhaustion and burnout and poor health and depression and anxiety and thoughts of suicide. So that's a little bit about what stress is, and this is important because when we talk about how we can help prevent suicide in the Air Force, people's experience of stress is part of that equation. It's one small part, but it's still a part of the equation. So let me ask you then, what are some stressors? You see several listed here, but what are some stressors in our everyday lives that we as military, or we who are military adjacent, deal with that regular civilians might not see? What stressors do we have in the military that others don't? And I used to be a college professor, so I can wait for a long time. Well, think about the military in of itself, right? When you signed on the dotted line and raised your hand, part of what you said when you made that commitment, even if you signed up for college money, even if you signed up to travel the world, even if you signed up to get technical work experience, when you raised your hand and signed up and said, I will protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, what you were really saying is, I will kill and die for the other people next to me. For the other people in this room, I will kill and die for you, right? Not a lot of jobs out in the civilian world have that level of stress. Even if we are in a reserve unit in Fort Worth and we're not in a time of global war, that's still the bottom underline of everything that we do, right? Our mission is to, as the old vice commander used to say, our mission is to reduce the enemy to hair, teeth, and eyeballs. And everything that we do is about doing violence against our adversaries, right? So that's a stressor most people don't have. And as on the sort of other side of that is we're also at greater risk, right? Because if we go downrange and are deployed, people might be shooting at us, people might be dropping bombs on us, right? That is a stressful thing to even think about possibly happening, let alone to experience. So we in the military might have additional stressors. Now, I'm not saying that people who are civilians, which is also us as mostly reservists, don't have significant stressors as well, because we do. But the military has some particular stressors that make our population even potentially more at risk. You see a bunch of ones listed here. I won't read them all out, but financial problems, deployment, death or serious injury, a personal medical issue, or being abused or neglected by a partner or a significant other, all stressors that impact a person's life. All right, so we talked about it. Real quick, what's the difference between stress and distress?
Distress is harmful.
Right, distress is the far side of that bell curve when it becomes counterproductive, when you get depressed, when you get anxious, when you become unable to act, right? And distress is when we've overtaxed our natural coping skills, right? Let's answer this question. When you experience a deadline for a major project and it's close, which of these three happens to you?
Stress.
B, stress, we think, right? You guys are good, right? You can teach the class now because you guys got it. B, stress. Distress is when it's too much, and distrust is totally irrelevant. So like all good Air Force quizzes, there's one answer you can immediately throw, right? Okay, so now we talked about stress. I talked a little bit about coping strategies for stress. What are healthy ways that we all in this room cope with stress? Just throw them out popcorn style. What do you got?
Breathe.
Read or breathe? Breathe, right? And not just, the breathing that we do sort of automatically that we don't think about, but intentional breathing, right? Like deep belly breathing or those kinds of things. Breathing, great. What else do we do to deal with stress?
Exercise.
Exercise. That's usually the first one people say. Yeah, what else?
Naps.
take a nap. And as long as it doesn't interfere with your real sleep cycle, then that's totally great. Yes. So the deal is, and I'm glad that this is the first class I've had where some joker didn't say, drink, right? Because the truth is, having a drink is okay if it's a way that you deal with stress. I'm not here to be the morality police and say no alcohol for you airmen, right? Because a drink or 2 drinks on occasion to help you sort of relax, that's okay. Now, if it becomes unhealthy and it's lots of binge drinking and lots of alcohol and it becomes a problem, then it's not a healthy way to cope with stress anymore. But the deal is, if it doesn't hurt you and it doesn't hurt someone else, even if it's weird, it's an okay way to cope with stress. Some of you may know this about me. I have a little wood shop at my house, and I make Harry Potter replica wands at my wood shop. Super nerdy, right? I mean, but it helps me de-stress. It's totally relaxing for me, even though it's like way high on the nerd chart, right? My wife, how many of you have met Dallas, the therapy dog that I have for the wing? My wife loves Dallas. She hates Dallas's, the Labrador Retriever's hair. And she has this weird wooden handle with a spring attached to it that she scrapes our carpets with and makes these little piles of hair. For some reason, that's very cathartic and relaxing and de-stressing for her. I think it's weird. She takes pictures of them, which I think is even weirder. But she's not hurting me, she's not hurting anyone else, and it helps her cope with stress. So I say thumbs up, what a great coping skill. Now I am a little worried that someday I'm going to return home and my bedroom wall is going to be covered in those pictures of dog hair. I don't know what I'm going to do when that happens. But for now, it's a healthy way to cope with stress. All right, so we talked about stress and distress, and the arc of this training is we're going to tell you a little bit about what puts people at risk, what might make a person get to the place where they're thinking about suicide, and then we're going to talk about how to intervene. So risk factors are one of the other many ways that a person can be at higher risk for suicide. But the most important thing, perhaps the most important thing from the entire suicide prevention training that you're receiving today is this up here at the top. There is no single cause of suicide. Suicide is what's called a wicked problem, not wicked like a value judgment, like wicked, God versus Satan kind of wicked, right? But wicked as in it's got a lot of things going on that sort of build up as a constellation of things that make a person get to a place where they might consider suicide. There's no single cause for suicide. And thankfully for us in this wing, I've been here almost 8 years now, and we've had very, very low suicide attempts and deaths by suicide in this wing. And I'm so grateful and thankful for that. But the truth is, every time there's a death by suicide in this place, in my old job, or when people just are talking about the subject in general, what do you think the number one question people ask me is when there's a death by suicide or a suicide attempt?
Why'd they do it?
Why'd they do it? That's always the number one question that people ask. And the answer to that question is a lot of things, right? And the answer to that question is almost always, the research indicates, almost always people saw that there were risk factors in a person's life. People saw warning signs, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, right? So that's the question people ask most often is why? And usually they want one answer, because X happened and that was the trigger. But the truth is, it's way too big of a problem. It's a wicked problem that has a lot of things going on. And so that's too simple of a solution to say why? Well, because they were going through a divorce. Right? Because there's lots of other stuff. And these are risk factors. Now, what are risk factors specifically? They're situations or problems that can increase the probability a person may attempt suicide. And you see a list of them here. Previous suicide attempts, relationship problems, access to lethal means, death of a family member, a mental health condition. You see all those kinds of things there. But the truth is, if you look at all the things on this list and think about what other risk factors there might be, are these things that I could just look at a person and say, oh, they must be having marital problems, just by looking at you at the shop. Like, we're on the flight line, you're doing your job, I'm doing my job, and I can look at you and go, huh, they're having legal problems, I can tell by looking at them. No, that's not what risk factors are. Risk factors are things that are going on in a person's life that we can't observe, that I can't look at them and say, wow, that person's in trouble, right? The only way to know if risk factors exist in a person's life is to have a relationship with them, to have some kind of context, to know what's going on with them, to know where their sort of normal state is and how they're deviating, changing from that normal state. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about more throughout the entire training is when we create relationships, when we create connections with the people around us, we are more likely to know what their risk factors are. They may confide in us that they're having family problems, that they've got physical or medical issues. They may have financial troubles. And then, if we see some observable warning signs later on, we may go, huh, I'm a little concerned now, and I'm going to check in with this person and make sure. But only if we have a relationship that's authentic can we do that easily. So risk factors increase the possibility that a person may attempt suicide. All right, I just showed you a bunch of them. We talked about them. Throw out 2 examples of a risk factor that you can think of.
Marital problems.
Marital problems. One more.
Bullying.
What's that?
Bullying.
Bullying, yeah. Someone could be a victim of bullying in person, in the shop, right? Or online even, right? Social media presence is a real thing, especially for some of our younger airmen, although our older airmen, and I say airmen with a capital A, meaning our civilians and other full-time folks too, might be getting bullied online, right? Or in person. So those are some good examples of risk factors, as well as the others we listed: financial problems, legal problems, relationship problems, medical diagnoses, that kind of thing. And here's a whole long list of them. Discrimination, who thought about that? That's kind of bullying, but taken to a whole other level, right? A history of violence in someone's life, community violence. So someone lives in a violent neighborhood because they may not have the financial resources to get out, or maybe where their family and loved ones are, or whatever. That can be an example of a risk factor as well. So, and again, we only know that these things are going on if we have a relationship with people. All right, so we talked about risk factors, and risk factors are things that I can't really tell about a person unless I know them on some level. Warning signs are a little bit different. Warning signs are specific behaviors that could indicate someone may be thinking about suicide. And indicate in this scenario means that I could observe. So I could walk down the hall and see Sergeant Pena crying in the hallway. And even if I never met him, even if I knew nothing about him, I could just be like, are you okay, man? Is everything all right? Because that's a warning sign that's observable, that I as an outsider can look at and go, oh, someone's struggling, right? I can see someone acting in a bizarre or strange way that sort of goes outside of social norms, and I can think, huh, that's a little bit strange. I'm going to make sure that that person's okay and doesn't need help. Or warning signs, even if we don't have a significant relationship with someone, we could have someone in the shop who's usually very upbeat, very outgoing, sort of likes to be with other people, gregarious, and suddenly they're sort of standoffish. They kind of spend time on their own. They don't engage with other people. That could be a warning sign as well. Even not knowing why that's going on, seeing that their behavior has changed is a warning sign, right? So they can be early, or they can be more urgent and immediate. Early are thoughts or actions that don't have a specific intent. And in this case, a specific intent means an intent to harm oneself. Or immediate are thoughts, ideations, with a strong intent to plan or act to do something to hurt oneself, right? And we're going to get into a little bit more detail about the difference between those. But that's warning signs. So we've got stress, distress, risk factors, warning signs, all leading up to a constellation of difficult things that a person might be experiencing. So, all that said, how do you know if someone's at risk? How do you know if someone's in trouble?
Their behavior.
Sometimes the behavior. And what about their behavior?
You just be on a complete 180.
Change, like a change in behavior, for sure. And it could be that they used to be really shy and quiet, and now they're like super gregarious. That's still a change. Most people would go, oh, that's positive change. But for that person, it may not be. It may be a coping mechanism to deal with the stress. They may have to get it out in some way, and that's their only outlet. So that's one. How else can we tell if someone's at risk? Man.
I would say, like, I don't know if this answers your question, but like taking a person serious, because I think sometimes if somebody confiding you, sometimes you don't take them serious. Is that a risk factor?
No, I mean, you can, yes, you can, I mean, taking someone at what they say at face value.
Right, if they say, I feel suicidal.
Is a way that you can tell that they're at risk by asking them, right? And if they're giving you an authentic, honest
you're
answer.
Just like, okay, whatever, and ignore the fact, like you're not taking them serious on what they're saying.
Right, so yes, you can tell that they're at risk if they say something that indicates that they're at risk, and then you take action because you're like, I don't want to miss something. Right? I used to work in public schools for a decade. I worked with all kinds of kids, K through 12, who were having serious emotional difficulties or mental health concerns. And I had a couple of students that would say they were feeling suicidal 7-8 times a day. And to be honest, I knew about to attempt suicide, right? Because if you don't take it seriously, to your point, then a person who is at risk may die by suicide, which is our ultimate goal, is to avoid that. So we can tell if someone's at risk in lots of ways: by knowing them, by having a relationship with them, by observing their behavior if it's a change, or by taking them seriously when they say things that sound a little bit, that make our gut kind of feel a little twisted, that feel like they're outside of the realm of what we would normally consider normal behavior for them. All right, we talked about a bunch of warning signs that you can observe. Any other warning signs that we didn't list that someone can think of? Now remember, they're observable and they can be immediate or they can be early warning signs.
You can just be like someone like in the civilian side, just ups and quits their job.
Yeah. Or, I mean, in the military, you can sort of up and quit in the military even, right? But yeah, someone who makes dramatic life decisions for apparently no reason, or for no reason that you understand, that could be a warning sign for sure. And the thing about this that's important is you know it when you see it, right? You're kind of like, I can't verbalize exactly what it is, but my gut is telling me something is off, and I'm going to trust my gut and make sure someone's okay. And this is sort of a rhetorical question, but why do you think we should pay attention to warning signs?
To prevent it.
Right, because the cost is high if we miss, right? We've had very few suicides, as I said, thankfully, in our wing, and in terms of just raw numbers, the numbers are pretty low, but the cost is really high, right? Someone dies by suicide, that's an incredibly high cost. So we have to pay attention to the risk factors and warning signs that we see, and I would rather be wrong 100 times, or I'd rather be right about checking in with someone 100 times than be wrong once if someone's in a dark place, right? Ma'am?
I hope you don't mind.
No.
I just thought of something, like one of the warning signs of I've noticed that people don't take serious is even like a shower. Like sometimes people don't have that hygiene, and people will be like, oh, they smell, or they look unkept.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a warning sign of that depression, but at the same time, it's kind of a warning of if that person was not like that, and then all of a sudden you notice that, because sometimes if you do that, people kind of tend to be like, oh, they're being lazy or something.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm making sense.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and that is definitely an observable warning sign, someone's hygiene. And in the military, it can even be uniform maintenance, right? Your uniform looks like trash, and, you're not, up to standards and that kind of thing. But for anyone, if their hygiene significantly changes or gets worse, that can absolutely be a warning sign, and something to take seriously, because it can be a sign for depression. And just because a person's depressed doesn't mean they're suicidal. In fact, most people who suffer from depression don't attempt suicide, right? Suicide is incredibly rare, but the cost is high. So even though it's very rare, the cost is high, so we want to intervene anytime we have a chance to. And that's why we should pay attention to warning signs. All right, so read the question carefully and tell me which of these is an example of an early warning sign. Looking for ways to access lethal means and take their life, taking unnecessary risks, self-harm, or historical trauma. What do you think? All right, well, let's go through them one by one. If someone's actually looking for lethal means, they want to get their hands on a weapon, do we think that's an early sign or an immediate sign?
Immediate.
That's more urgent, that's an immediate sign. Taking unnecessary risks, someone who previously didn't go skydiving and now they're skydiving and they're, driving fast and doing stuff like that. Is that a warning sign? We can see it, right? We can observe someone taking risks, so that's a possibility. What about self-harm? Self-harm is pretty intense, it's pretty high level. If someone has reached the point where they're cutting or self-harming, it's usually a more immediate or urgent risk. And historical trauma, is that a warning sign? That's more of a risk factor, right? It's something that we don't know unless we have a relationship. I can't look at someone and say, you went through a divorce 10 years ago, right? So that is more of a risk factor. So by the process of elimination, we get to B, taking unnecessary risks is an example of a warning sign. One more, this one's a little easier. What's an immediate warning sign up here on the board? We just talked about it. C, self-harm, you got it, right? Self-harm is a tricky one because self-harm is actually for some people a coping mechanism, and that doesn't mean that they're suicidal or having thoughts of harming or killing themselves, but it's a way for them to cope with stress or anxiety, right? So self-harm isn't always about suicide, but if someone's self-harming, there's other risk factors and potential warning signs that we want to address for sure. So that's why it's an immediate warning sign. And we don't need to clarify this, I think you guys get it. All right, so you know it, you love it, you can't live without it. You've seen it 1,000 times. It's the ACE model for intervention in suicide. So we talked about stress and distress. We talked about risk factors and warning signs. Now someone is at the point where our gut tells us something is not right. We know because of our personal relationship that there are risk factors. We see some warning signs. We know that they're stressed out at work or at home or whatever. So we need to intervene. Now is the time. And we use the ACE model to do so. You guys have seen it. Ask, care, escort. There's no right or wrong answer, but I want your thoughts, because this is a collaboration and a discussion. Which of these three, ask, care, or escort, do you think is the most important? Again, there's no wrong answer, but I want your thoughts.
Caring.
Caring, one for caring, what do you guys
I
say?
think escort.
Escort, okay.
Ask.
Ask, okay, so we got the whole gamut, right? And the truth is, you have to do them all. But for me, I'm with Airman, is it Melton or Welton?
Melton.
Melton, I'm with Airman Melton, because if you care authentically for someone, you're gonna ask if they're in trouble. You're gonna ask if you see risk factors or warning signs. And if you care enough to ask, if they really are in trouble, you're going to escort them to someone who can help them, right? So again, there's not a right or wrong answer, but I like the idea that caring for someone as the core means that you're gonna ask and you're gonna escort anyway, right? So that's our intervention, and the simple fact of the matter is, it's effective because one, it's simple, and two, it's relatively low risk. I don't know if you remember about 3 years ago in this training, we had the Columbia Screener, which is the suicide screener, 6 questions, and you had to actually ask your classmates, you had to look at them in the eye and say, are you thinking about killing yourself, right? So the asking part should be relatively simple. It's just saying the words, right? But it's not just saying the words, it's caring enough to ask the question in the first place, and then caring enough to give them help if they need help after.
Like that awkward question, right?
Right, and so, I mean, for me, I'm a mental health person. I've been a social worker for 20 years now, and this is my job, and this is what I do. And still, when I ask that question, if someone says yes, I get a knot in my stomach, right? And I do this professionally, and I've done it for a long time. You all probably have never had someone in that situation, or if you have, you know what I'm talking about, that knot in your stomach. So even for a professional who's done this a lot, it's still an awkward question when the answer is yes, right? But because I know what the ACE model is, and I know that it's easy to follow, if someone says yes, just like with you all, if someone says yes to you, you can be like, all right, it sounds like this is a very serious concern, and I'm really worried about you, and I want to make sure that you're okay. So right now, please come with me, and we're going to go talk to Director of Psychological Health, Mary Ellen. Or I'm going to take you over to the ARC, the Airman Resource Center, and see if you can talk to someone over there can help you. I'll take you to mental health on a drill weekend because we have a mental health flight. Like I said at the beginning, I'm the chief of that flight. And that's what we do, we escort. Now, who else can you escort to? I listed 3, but who else do you escort to? If those folks aren't available, or if... Chaplain? Who else?
Your shirt.
First Sergeant, your shirt. Law enforcement. If there's no one else around, you can go to law enforcement. Or someone in the chain of command. Or heck, for lack of something else, someone that you trust to know what to do, right?
You could call the 988, the crisis line.
You could also call the crisis line. You can call with them. You can say, I want to be here with you while you call this line, right? So there are lots of places that we can escort physically to, or metaphorically on the crisis line.
I got a question about that escort.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, the awkward question.
Uh-huh.
So, like, I don't know about you because I thought about what you said. Like, for a long time, it took me a minute to even directly ask the person. Like, do you want to kill yourself?
Right.
I mean, to me, that was like a very hard question to ask. Because I want to be like, do you want to hurt yourself? But no, you have to say, do you want to kill yourself?
Yes, and that is
Like very hard.
excellent point, because the truth is, if someone is in a very distressed psychological state and they've got all these risk factors and things going on in their lives and they're to a dark place where they're thinking about suicide, and you say, are you thinking about hurting yourself? They might be like, no, it's not going to hurt. I'm going to pull the trigger and be gone. That won't hurt, right? And it could be that asking that question doesn't really get at the heart of what's going on. And it could also be that they perceive it as, oh, they won't take me seriously, because they're not even asking a question about it seriously, right? So you're right. The question is, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about hurting yourself, right? Not are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself? All right, we had this question a little bit ago in a slightly different form, but now we're starting to get into outside of intervention in the moment when someone's in crisis. And this also works in that moment when someone's in crisis. But what are ways that we can show that we care? What can you do to show that you care?
Just ask people about the day.
Like, be authentically interested in people's lives, right? Ask them about their day. And not, hey, how's your day? Good? Okay, cool. Right? But like, for real, I want to know what's going on with you, is everything. And not in a way that's prying or creepy or whatever, but in a way that they know is safe and authentic so that they can come to you, right? What else can we do to show we care? Listen, right? We may not have to seek them out and say, hey, are you doing all right? They may come to us. And instead of like being, yeah, I got 1,000 emails, it's drill weekend, I'm drinking from the fire hose, I can't deal with you right now, we listen. We take a moment, we take a breath, and we say, is there anything more important right now than this person's life? And I'm going to tell you, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that there's ever a yes answer to that. I mean, in a combat zone, in bullets and ordnance are raining down on you, maybe you could convince me that that's not the right time. But other than that, I can't think of a single time when someone comes to you and asks for your help, or someone comes to you to talk about something that's important, that you would say, yeah, there's other stuff that's more important than your life right now, right? So other ways that you can show that you can care. I'm Italian. My family's from Sicily, and I'm also a social worker, which means I care with food, right? I like to bring food to people, and whether it's just donuts for the security forces and the Navy cops at the gate, or whether it's for my shop, or just going around to units taking treats or snacks, simple things like that can show that you care. And it's not because you're trying to buy someone's affection with a fancy Krispy Kreme, right? It's because it gives you an opportunity to look at someone and say, you know, I thought about you enough to get you this small thing. And it's not a big deal, but to a person in crisis, to a person who's struggling, to a person who feels like they're not important and they don't matter, being seen by being offered a donut may be the best thing that happened to them that day, right? So small, simple things that we can do to show that we care. Another way that you can show that you care is by telling people, I care about you. You're important to me. And not just by using your words, but in your actions as well, right? And that's something that we as the military in general sometimes struggle with. But being honest and authentic about your concern for another person and saying those things out loud is another way that we can show that you care. And there are hundreds of other ways that we can show that we care. Okay, so think about specifically resources at our installation that you might take someone to. We already sort of listed these off, so if someone's at immediate risk, one more time, tell me where you would take them. Mental health. Where? Where else?
Police.
Security forces, police, somewhere else.
You may just have to call 911.
911, take them to the hospital. JPS will admit them for a psychiatric hold if need be, if they do the assessment and find out. The SHIRT you said, the chain of command, someone that you trust, right? All these people, come to the ARC, the Airman Resource Center over by the commissary. Anyone in there, we have a connect to care concept, which means anyone in there, even if it's EO and you're not coming for an EO complaint, anyone in the ARC will take that person and wrap their arms around them and say, you're gonna be okay, I got you, and get them to the right place. You guys got it. All right, so a whole lot of what we talked about up to this point sort of gets at that question of why someone might consider suicide and what we can do in a moment when someone is considering suicide as people who can intervene. But the Air Force now and the Department of Defense is also wanting to add this concept of time-based intervention to our model of suicide prevention. And time-based intervention is sort of what it sounds like. It means we're taking the lethal means, whatever those might be, but I'll talk specifically about them in a minute, and we are storing them properly, thereby creating life-saving time between a suicidal thought of an airman or guardian and their access to lethal means. And I'm going to make this really simple. If you've got someone who's at their wit's end, they're in crisis, they've got a lot of risk factors, historical trauma, they've got a lot of warning signs, they've gotten to the point where they feel like, I have no other hope, there's nothing left for me, I'm going to kill myself now. And they have it, and they're sitting on the bed at their house and they have a loaded gun in the bedside table. How long does it take for them to pick up that gun and pull the trigger?
2 seconds.
2 seconds, 5 seconds, right? A matter of just a few seconds, right? Same scenario, that person is at the end of their rope, they feel like they have no better option, they're in their room sitting on the edge of their bed, but instead of a loaded gun in their bedside table, there's actually a loaded gun in a safe in another room. So now they have to go to that safe in the other room and walk to get the gun and open the safe and then pull the trigger. How long does that take? 2 minutes? A little bit longer, right? Now, what if we store the ammunition from that weapon in another place? Or what if we put a gun lock on the chamber of that handgun so that they have to get in the safe and then use the gun lock? Right now we're 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Time between the thought, I'm going to kill myself now, and the access to lethal means is time-based prevention. And the truth is, for every second that goes on between the thought and the action is a moment where a person can change their mind. Moment where they can have a protective thought, right? When they're walking to the gun safe across the room, instead of reaching into their bedside table, when walking across the gun safe to the other side of the room, they might say to themselves, I got an 8-year-old son. What if my son finds my body? Right? Now my son doesn't have their parent, and they also have the trauma of finding me dead, right? Right? And that's not a protective thing because of guilt. That's a protective thing because of love, right? I love my kid. I don't want my kid to go through that. In that moment, walking across the room to get to the safe, time gave me an opportunity to think through it. Or I could be walking and saying, man, I've survived a divorce. I've been through divorce. I'm having relationship problems now, but I come through a divorce before. I can get through this. We can get through this. My partner and I can get through this together. It's not as bad as pulling the trigger. Right? So time-based prevention is all about that stuff. It's all about the moments between the time a person decides and the moment that they have access to lethal means for them to feel something that protects them. Right? And so in order to actualize this concept, we have what's called the Go Slow model, which you've seen before. It's been out for 2 years in the Department of the Air Force, but we haven't talked a lot about it in previous training. Go Slow model is about storing the lethal means in a way that gives people time to think protective thoughts. And SLOW is an acronym for safes, locks, and outside the home. So you're going to store lethal means in safes, behind locks, or outside of the home. So when I say lethal means, what do you think I mean specifically by lethal means? I'll go back to that.
Something that's going to end their life.
What's that?
Something that will end their life.
Yeah, I mean something that is easily lethal, right? And the truth is, in the Air Force, as well as in suicide throughout the country and the world, in fact, the number one most lethal means to die by suicide is through a handgun, gunshot wound, right? In fact, in the Air Force, the vast majority of deaths by suicide are by gunshot wound. Okay. The top 3 means for death by suicide are gunshot wounds from personal handgun, asphyxiation, which can be hanging, or chemical asphyxiation like car exhaust, and then medication, overdose of some kind, right? So time-based prevention works really well on the number one most lethal method, which is guns. But it also works for medication, right? If you have medication that could be lethal, you can have it stored or have someone that you love, a family member, monitor your medication for you. Now, asphyxiation is harder to control, right? Because we can't take away everything from everybody. And so if someone wants to find a lethal means, you've got rope, you've got shoelaces, you've got belts, you've got your car, right? The truth is, we can't lock up all of those things. But what we can do is lock up guns, which are by far and away the most lethal and the most commonly used method to attempt suicide, and medication. So what do you think this means practically for us in the Air Force? Does this mean Colonel Harrison, our wing commander, is going to go to someone's house and say, give me your guns, hand over all your guns right now, I'm going to lock them up? No. One, he couldn't really do that legally in most cases, and two, we got 2,000 people on our wing. How is he going to do that to everybody? No, the go slow model is not about coming to get your guns, or it's not about telling everybody you have to lock up your weapons. It's more about general weapon safety, and it's about knowing that if someone's at risk, if we see someone's in distress, if we see someone has risk factors and warning signs, and we felt it in our gut, and we know that they're not okay, and we've gotten them help and support, we also say, is it right if we lock up your guns just for the next week or two while you're getting through the roughest part of this, and then, in a week or two, we'll just talk about it again. That's what Go Slow is about. It's not about coming to your house to take away all your guns and trample your, constitutional rights. That's not what this is. This is if someone is in trouble, someone is in crisis, we want to put those lethal means in a safe, behind a lock, or outside the home. And they may say, no, you can't take my guns, I need those. All right, well, then will you at least take these gun locks? And by the way, if anyone needs gun locks, I didn't bring any today, but I have hundreds of them in my office. You can come by and get a box, a case, or just come by and get a couple of gun locks for your own guns, or for giving to one of your airmen or people that you need in your life, or you have in your life. So, nope, I'm not gonna lock it, or I'm not gonna let you take it outside the home. Okay, well, let's put it in a safe. Nope, I'm not gonna let you do that. Well, at least will you take this gun lock and put a gun lock on the chamber? Yeah, all right, I'm willing to do that. So that's what Go Slow is. What do you guys think about this as a model for suicide prevention? And this is an honest, open discussion. As I said at the beginning, this is about participation. And I'm not going to go and tattle to anybody if you think this doesn't make sense, if you think it wouldn't work or doesn't work for you. What are your thoughts?
I feel like, just with guns in general, that's just a touchy subject for certain people. So at least putting something out there is better than saying nothing at all.
Great, I love that. And it's funny. The military people in the military own guns at about a 3-to-2 ratio over non-military folks. So military people already own more guns than average civilians. In Texas, we own more guns per capita than every other state, except for like Wyoming and Montana, but they have like 9 people in those states, so that throws the numbers off. But for a state with a real population, Texas owns more guns. So we're talking about a population that already in the military owns more guns, and in Texas owning more guns than anyone else. You're right, it's hard to come and say, I need to take your guns, because it's a touchy subject. But it's better than nothing, and it's for targeted moments when we see someone at risk and we can say, okay, we've got the Go Slow model, we're gonna help them lock it up, right? Does anyone think this is not useful? Does anyone think this won't have any value added for our military folks and for suicide risk?
I think it depends on the person. It's definitely an option, but just like I don't think it's not a universal option. It's definitely would work better for certain individuals than it would for other people, but an option is better than no option.
Yeah, so I mean, again, there's, suicide is preventable. I do this work because I fundamentally, at the core of my being, believe that the best thing could happen to me is I get fired from my job because you don't need me anymore, because there's no more suicide, because there's no more interpersonal violence. And I believe that we can get to that place. I believe suicide is preventable. I believe interpersonal violence is preventable. And this is another tool in our toolbox to help make that happen.
I think with that, Jim, the problem is not kind of going by what he said. It's like trying to talk to a person that has a substance in their body. Like if they're drunk and you tell them, hey, take this lock. They're not, trying to get them to do any of the things you have. So it's like sensitive, but at the same time of like sensitive timing too. Like you almost have to talk to them when they're not drinking. You have to talk to them before it happens. So it's kind of like what you're saying. You have to kind of know the person to be like, okay, I I see some signs, they're not drunk, like, it just
Right.
seems so much to it that a person is just a lot of capacity of, like, do you have the capacity for the person?
Right, well, and that's why we're doing this training, right? That's how we get that conversation out there, so that it's not like the first time you ever heard of it is when I'm with you in the ER saying, okay, we're about to head back to your house now, and I want to talk about your locking up your guns, because I know you're an avid hunter or whatever, and you have guns at home. So it's not the first time when someone's already feeling vulnerable and defensive, right? So yes, and alcohol, of course, always complicates things. So yes, and it's definitely tougher to reason with a person who's under the influence of substances, usually than it is to reason with them otherwise, right? We talked about why it's important you guys get this, and we still have a significant amount of slides to get through for this in the SAPR, so we're going to move on. We talked about lethal means. I listed a whole bunch of options. You know, in inpatient psychiatric care, they take away everything. They take away your belt, they take away your shoelaces, they have chairs that weigh 200 pounds so that you literally can't pick it up to do damage, right, to yourself or to others, right? So anything could be a lethal means. We can't lock up everything, but what we can do is get at the things that are most risky, which are guns and medication. All right, so all of that is to say, well, so what, right? We talked about all the things. We're like, well, what can I do about it? I'm just one person. I can't change, you know, someone's attitudes. I can't change someone's life or behaviors. But the truth is we can, and that's what this training is really about. At the end of the day, this training is about ways that we can create an environment that feels safer and better for all of our airmen, capital A airmen, so that they are protected, so that you put me out of a job, and so that suicide and sexual assault or interpersonal violence never happen in our military again. And the things that we do to make that happen are we use protective factors. They're conditions or attributes of individuals, families, and communities that promote health and well-being. They build upon them and make individuals and communities stronger and better and able to counteract risk factors. Resilience in general, which is why we do some resilience trainings. Interpersonal community and connectedness, and we're going to talk a lot about that one. That's a big one, right? Having a safe environment, having positive relationships. These are all cultural and spiritual beliefs individuals may have, can also be incredible protective factors. In the Air Force, we can't control all of those things. I can't make someone spiritual and say, you must believe in this spiritual concept. But what I can do is give people an opportunity to be connected with one another and to care about one another. And part of that is what we talked about, knowing the people around you, knowing the people in your shop, having an authentic, real relationship with it. But some of it is also events, things that we do, fun stuff we do as a shop, as a squadron, as a wing, right? Family Day, the Patriot Games. Did anyone participate in the Patriot Games that we did, right? Stuff like that is a protective factor because it creates connection with one another, and connectedness is one of the best protections against suicide, right? And the thing is, it has to be real and it has to be authentic. I can't mandate or legislate that you be nice to your coworkers. I can't. I mean, I could, give you paperwork, I could talk about your, job performance, I could do all that kind of stuff, but I can't literally come to you and say, you need to be a nicer person to everyone around you. But what I can do is lead by example and show you what it's like to be a nice person to people around you. Lead by example by coming to you, even if you're a pain in my butt, and being authentic and caring about you, right? So when we build connection and community, we decrease the risk for suicide by increasing protective factors. And one of the key things that makes people, and this is the Joyner model of suicide. I'm not going to go into the theory, but another piece about why folks sometimes consider suicide is that they don't feel as though they're important. They don't feel as though they add value. So another thing that we can do, and we're all leaders in the Air Force, whether you're in a slick sleeve airman basic or a chief bell, right? We can communicate to people that they're important and that they matter and that they're valued, right? And I'm not talking about the winking the gun on the flat line being like, hey, Milton, you're doing great, love you, looks good, right? That doesn't really do much. But I'm talking something more about, hey, Airman Milton, I know I don't know what goes on in the ammo shop, but when I was on the flight line the other day and I saw the way you as an E3 were like managing the traffic and you were making sure people were being safe and respectful around the ordinance and you were an expert in your field, even though you're a relatively new young airman. That was so cool, man, and I really appreciate that you're that focused on taking care of the mission and making sure that people around you are doing their job the way they're supposed to. Good on you, man, that was great, right? There's a difference between, hey, way to go, Milton, you're looking good, and that. Even though I know nothing about ammo, and even though I'm sure all that I said, he's like, nope, don't do that. But the truth is, if I look him in the eye and I say something specific about something good he did and I tell him good job, that can go so far to being a protective force. And one of the key things that we need to have in our Air Force to help keep people from dying by suicide. Okay, so now the what if, or now the so what. What are things that you, each individual in this room, can do to support a positive culture and create healthier norms in your work center, in our Air Force? I want a specific example, something that you could walk out of here today, go back to the shop, go back to the flight line, go back to your office, and do to make our Air Force culture more positive. Give me an example.
Just be more involved in your work center.
Participate, be engaged, right? If you have an office, don't go in the office and close your door and come in at 7:30 and close your door and leave at 4 and never talk to anybody, right? Yes, being engaged, being part of the process. That's one thing. What else?
One thing I know is like just going to lunch together. That makes a big difference.
Doing stuff together that's not work related, right? Going to lunch together, participating in a Unite Fund event, going to the Patriot Games, going to a holiday party that may be happening. We're getting close to December. A lot of units are going to have holiday parties, and a lot of people, you know, Medical Colonel Copley is working really hard to get maximum involvement from all the people, and he really thinks it's important, and we all agree, and we still get 30% attendance at a holiday party. Now, compared to 2 years ago or 4 years ago when we got 10 people or 12 people would show up out of a squadron of 250, we're making great strides. But yes, doing stuff together that's with people from work, but it's not about work, is another excellent way to create a positive culture. And I talked about giving positive feedback, right? Or even giving feedback that may not be positive, that's constructive in a healthy and supportive way so that the person feels as though you really actually authentically care for them and want them to do well, right? There are lots of things. One of the key things that I also like to point out is we can be honest about our own stuff. We can be honest that I'm a grumpy, crotchety old chief and I don't want to talk to anybody, right? I just want to get my job done and say, you know what? That's me, but I'm a leader, and my job as a leader is to lead by example. And so I'm going to break out of that crotchety old chief shell, and I'm going to go and be with my people, and I'm going to go out to lunch with them when they go to lunch and do these kinds of things. It can also be being authentic about our own struggles, right? You picked it up, if you've been in my trainings before, I've talked in more detail about it. You may have picked it up from what I said earlier on today. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual, physical assault, trauma, recurring for years. My sister attempted suicide multiple times. And when I talk about that and say, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to seek help when you're struggling. It's okay to feel broken and to ask for someone to help you. In fact, the Army did research, it's kind of old now, about 10 years ago, that said in the military, you are 13 times more likely to experience a positive career impact if you seek help early, right? If you say, I need help early before something becomes a problem, 13 times more likely to have a positive career impact than a negative one. That's good news, right? And if I as a leader can tell you, I've gone to mental health myself, and I've gone through lots of counseling, and it was hard, and I struggled, and I felt sometimes like it made me weak, and I felt sometimes like I'm a mental health person already, why can't I just manage this on my own? But I got through on the other side, and I'm better for it, then maybe you'll feel more comfortable coming to me and saying, I'm really struggling. Right? So one way that we can support a positive culture and healthy norms is by being honest and authentic about our own stuff. And that may not be true for you. You may never have experienced those kinds of things, and that's okay. But if you have, and you're able to be open and honest about it, that can really have a positive impact as well. And we talked about those things that we can do. And we already talked about this some too, but give me a couple more examples of healthy coping skills. We said breathing, working out, what else?
Talking to people.
talking to people, going and seeking professional assistance, or just talking to peers, right? Friends, family, loved ones, right? Doing a mindful practice for stress relief, yoga or meditation or that kind of thing, right? Or like I said, scraping little piles of hair on the carpet or making Harry Potter wands, whatever it is, as long as you're not hurting yourself or somebody else, it can help with stress. All right, so Mimi listed the 988 line a little earlier. That's one of the many resources that are available. These are sort of national resources that are available. The military crisis line, the veterans crisis line, we have someone in the room who used to work there, so she, I'm sure, would plug that really well. These are all resources that are available to anybody, no matter where they are, which is good and useful in the reserves, right? Because every one of the people in my shop in mental health lives 3 hours or more away. So I can't always just say, go talk to the first sergeant or, come talk to me or whatever. Sometimes I have to be able to refer them to national resources or resources that are more close to them, right? All right.
I just want to add something about
Yes, ma'am.
988, the crisis line. So just remember that they're people and humans. So if you don't get a good one, call again. Seriously. I'm just saying, because I'm a veteran, and we've called customer service and they were crappy. You just hang up, or they hang up on you or whatever. You call and you get a good one, or you may go to the commissary and you may get a good cashier. The next, just stating, like, these are people and humans. So if you feel like they were not helpful, call again.
That's good, and we hope that all the professionals, you're right, but we would hope all the professionals on there would be amazing. But the truth is, and anyone can have a bad day, and there are people who maybe are not best suited for the jobs that they do. So it's true, if someone is in crisis and they reach out and it doesn't feel like they're getting their needs met, just hang up and call again. Totally okay. All right, so this is what we talked about throughout the course of this training. You should now be able to do all of these things, and I know that you can because we had a good conversation about it. And so now we're going to switch over. I'm ready when you are.
Okay, I'm recording.
Good day. Thank you for attending today's training. We've just completed suicide prevention training, and now we'll move on to the SAPR training for your annual 2023 requirement. As with the initial training in suicide prevention, there are a few disclaimers associated with today's training, which I'll read to you now. The topic in this training may include content that is graphic and sensitive in nature. It may be upsetting at times and make it difficult to participate due to past exposure or personal experience. Open dialogue is encouraged with respect to those around you. Please feel free to leave the room or take a break as needed. Individuals have the option to reach out to the local Sexual Assault Response Coordinator, SARC, or prevention personnel to complete the training in private if need be. If you would like to speak to someone for support, we are providing these resources for you. The local SAPR office number is 817-782-3827, and you may also reach the DoD Safe Helpline. The number for that is at the end of this training. A second disclaimer is that I am not a SARC or victim advocate. I'm in the Violence Prevention Office, and I can't guarantee confidentiality if you disclose an incident of sexual harassment or sexual assault to me or in this forum. If you'd like to speak with a confidential source, you can contact 301st Fighter Wing's SAPR office at 782-3827, or use the Department of Defense Safe Helpline phone app or website to find a resource near you. I can also assist you with making a call or direct you to the proper office. Now that we've gotten those disclaimers taken care of, let's talk about what we're going to be discussing today in this training. Our learning objectives, as you can see listed here, I won't read them all to you, are to find out as much information as we can about the SAPR program and about the services that are provided for assault and harassment victims. As you can see, the objectives are listed there. And the important thing to remember throughout this entire training is that the most important individuals in this process are the SARC, or the SAPR office, and the victim advocates and the victim council. Anybody who has questions, whether they be leaders, members, victims of sexual assault or harassment, is encouraged to reach out to those folks first because they have the best information and will be able to preserve the rights for individuals who have been sexually assaulted. Let's start with a few definitions. We're going to go through each of these definitions as they're defined according to the SAPR office. They're not necessarily the UCMJ definitions, but they are definitions that we'll be using today for the remainder of the training. First, it's not so much a definition as a pictorial depiction of the continuum of harm. As you can see on the continuum of harm, the my right, your left side of the screen, you have a green screen that shows a professional environment, or a green field that shows a professional environment. This is the ideal, perfect scenario in which an environment in a workplace is functioning harmoniously, engaged leadership, Air Force core values are always up front, an environment of dignity and respect. It's a safe environment where everyone feels respected and important. As we move along the continuum, behaviors become more grievous, from the yellow early warning signs into harassment and ultimately to sexual assault. As you can see, these items on the continuum of harm become more and more severe in nature and move from the harassment realm into the assault realm. And we'll discuss the difference between harassment and assault now. The definition, according to the SAPR office, of sexual harassment is listed here. I won't, again, read the entire definition for you, but at the end of the day, it's basically creating a hostile work environment where sex is used as part of the process of creating that hostile work environment, and where there are certain demands made on individuals in order to either achieve favor or to avoid a negative consequence to their career or their personal work environment. That differs from sexual assault in one key way, and as you can see based on the definitions, the assault definition is much shorter, and that's because where assault is concerned, there's a physical touching involved in the process, which moves it out of the realm of sexual harassment into the realm of sexual assault. The intention and unwanted sexual touching of another person when that person does not or is not capable of giving consent. Again, it's a SAPR definition, not necessarily the UCMJ definition, which is more specific. So in the discussion of sexual assault as a definition, we talked about consent. Further discussion of consent is found on this slide. It's a freely given agreement to engage in sexual activities, or truthfully, consent is not just about sex. In the context of the sexual assault prevention training, we talk about consent in that way, but you can think about consent in any number of ways. We learned consent when we were very young, elementary age, kindergarten children learn consent when they ask permission from another child to play with a toy that child is playing with, that kind of thing. But in our purposes, it's a mutual agreement between all parties involved. It must be obtained regardless of how a person is dressed or past sexual history with that person, and it cannot be given if someone is placed in fear, threatened, or incapable of giving consent. Some examples of when a person might be incapable of giving consent are they have not reached the age of majority of 18. That's a federal age of majority, even though in some states the age of majority might be 17. We in the Air Force go by the federal standard of the age of consent being 18. Another scenario would be when someone is incapacitated, either because of drugs, alcohol, other substances, or when someone is physically unable to say no or to object physically. Those are all examples of when consent may not be able to be given. And it's important to note that in the Air Force, where alcohol is involved, consent cannot be present. Let me state that again because it's a pretty significant bright line standard. If alcohol is present, consent cannot be present, even if the alcohol is consumed in very small quantities, because the Air Force wants to have a zero tolerance rule where it's concerned in terms of consent and drug or alcohol use. So we've talked a lot about the definitions, and the whole arc of the training is we'll tell you a little bit about what sexual assault and sexual harassment are, then we'll talk about ways that we as individuals can intervene in those scenarios, and ultimately we'll talk about creating an environment that's a better, safer, healthier place for all of us in the Air Force. So why is it important for leadership to address sexual harassment and sexual assault? This is a question that has many different answers, but one of the most important answers is that it's because it keeps our people safe. It keeps our people safe if they've been victims of sexual harassment or assault, but it also creates an environment, when used proactively, to keep individuals from ever being sexually assaulted in the first place. And obviously, if we're living our Air Force core values, we don't want any individual in our charge to be harmed in any way, including sexual violence. Does alcohol cause a sexual assault? Well, the simple answer to that question is no. A sexual assault is a predatory act by an individual who takes advantage of another individual, and whether each or one of those individuals has had alcohol has no bearing on whether an assault occurred. Now, it is possible that the presence of alcohol might decrease people's inhibitions, might lead to an environment where sexual assault is more likely to happen, but sexual assault is not caused by someone using alcohol, or more specifically, alcohol use is not an excuse for a sexual assault. All right, well, if you've gone to the hospital or the doctor's office, you've seen a patient's Bill of Rights probably posted on their walls. The victims' rights for sexual assault victims or harassment victims are very similar to those. And at the end of the day, they're pretty straightforward. They make sense with our Air Force core values, and they look pretty comprehensive. Ultimately, victims should be treated with fairness and respect. There should be some degree of privileged communication available to victims, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later as we talk about the difference between restricted and unrestricted reports, and all the other rights that are listed here, including being protected from an alleged offender, being able to participate in their own legal proceedings, and experiencing proceedings that are free from unreasonable delay. So as you can see, SAPR personnel have full confidentiality, and it depends on the type of report that's filed as to how the SAPR personnel might report that information outside of the SAPR office. But at the end of the day, if an individual who's a victim or survivor chooses to not have other parties involved in the discussion of their sexual assault, then the SAPR office maintains 100% victim confidentiality. If a restricted report has been filed, SAPR personnel cannot speak of the details of the report with anyone outside of the individual and those providing service for the individual who have a need to know. It's not something that is broadcast, it's not something that's given to the chain of command or to outside law enforcement, and we'll go through a little roadmap of how that looks a bit later. If an unrestricted report has been filed, SARCs and victim advocates can only discuss information the victim has shared with them, and then only with individuals who have a need to know within the chain of command and in the criminal investigative system. So about 3 years ago now, Congress met to do a review of the Department of Defense sexual assault prevention programs across the department. As a result of that congressional meeting, many recommendations were made to changes that could be made to the Department of Defense's policies to ensure that victims and survivors received better services. One of those recommendations that has been enacted by the Air Force is to take sexual harassment services and allow SAPR and SAPR office personnel, SARCs and victim advocates, to provide sexual harassment services to individuals who are experience an environment at work where sexual harassment is alleged to occur. So that is something new, again, designed to protect victims, and also because we know on that continuum of harm, sometimes sexual harassment is a gateway into sexual assault. And that's not always the case, but as a continuum, sometimes those things are interrelated. So SAPR office, as of July of 2022, can now provide additional services to members who are experiencing sexual harassment. And those members that are eligible are listed there, and that applies to a restricted or an unrestricted report. Now, that doesn't mean that the individual who is alleging sexual harassment is taking place in the workplace doesn't also follow the EO process to go through making a report. It just means that now, in addition to that support, the SAPR office can provide harassment services. And so now, we talked about eligibility for sexual harassment services. This is the eligibility for sexual assault services. And you can see they're listed here. I won't read them all to you, but it's military members and they're eligible 18-year-old or older family members, as well as DAF civilian employees. And the Air National Guard has its own policies and procedures. The second bullet about the Family Advocacy Program is a complex one here at the 301st Fighter Wing and on NAS Fort Worth JRB, because we don't have an Air Force medical treatment facility, which means we don't have a mental health or family advocacy program per se on base here that's Air Force specific. The Navy does provide one. However, the Navy usually will refer our folks to a local Air Force base, such as Shepherd or Dyess. All right, so when I talked about reporting sexual assault, there's only one office that can take a report of sexual assault and officially complete the DD Form 2910 so that services are available, and that is the SARC or the SAPR victim advocate, and in some cases healthcare personnel. And they're the only ones that can document it, and it can only be documented on a 2910 form, and only after it's been documented on a 2910 does it become an official report of sexual assault rather than just a disclosure of sexual assault by one of our members. An unrestricted report triggers notification to the assault chain of command, or of the assault to the chain of command, as well as to MCIO, and a restricted report, as in there are more restrictions on the release of information, are kept confidential, but can later be converted into an unrestricted report, as you see in the fourth bullet there. There are other resources that are available to individuals who have been sexually assaulted outside of the SAPR or SARC office, but each of those resources has different reporting requirements and may not be able to provide 100% confidentiality to the individual. And so, individuals who have been sexually assaulted and who wish to make a report should seek the assistance of the SAPR office, the SARC, the SAPR victim advocate. As you see there are personnel like the chaplains or the religious services teams that can provide counseling and have 100% confidentiality, but there are other organizations that an individual might report to where they would then have to make a mandated report. And this will be more clearly defined in this next slide, which shows really the most important key elements of what reporting sexual assault looks like in the Air Force. As you'll see, the signs on both left and right side have the same exact services for members who have been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. They can see the SARC, they can see mental health, they can get chaplain services, they can get medical services, victim advocacy, and special victims counsel services. Exactly the same as on your right for an unrestricted report. The only difference are those outlined in yellow that you see, and that is command involvement and law enforcement investigation. So an unrestricted report simply broadens the scope of the information and those who are available to receive that information so that an investigation can take place and so that commanders can make decisions about keeping their individuals who are alleging sexual harassment or sexual assault to be safe. But at the end of the day, everything else is fundamentally the same, and that's a key difference that everyone needs to know. But if you have questions, as always, contact your SAPR office or speak to your SARC or victim advocate. You see also the information for our SARC Laurel Lofton there as well. I briefly touched on the concept of disclosure versus report a little bit ago, and at the end of the day, disclosure is simply the act of making a previously unknown sexual assault incident known, but a report is an official documented filing, and this is something that the SARC and the SAPR's office will navigate with individuals who are making a report. So how are they documented, restricted and unrestricted reports? Well, we just told you that's on the DD Form 2910. And which report triggers a notification of the assault to command authorities and MCIO, such as OSI or security forces? That would be an unrestricted report because there's fewer restrictions on the information about the sexual assault. True or false, active duty airmen, guardians, and reserve members may receive sexual harassment advocacy services through the SAPR office. Well, that's true, as we said, because as of July of 2022, because of the congressional review of DoD programs, harassment services are now available to members who are being harassed or have been harassed in the workplace. So now you can see this slide that talks about expanded eligibility, and I'll just read it to you so that it's very clear. As of November 2021, a victim can maintain the option to file a restricted report if the victim did not personally report the sexual assault incident to law enforcement, even if they disclosed the assault to their commander or personnel in their chain of command, and if there's an ongoing investigation into sexual assault incident initiated by a third party and not due to the victim's disclosure to law enforcement. Previously, before the congressional review, if an individual disclosed to a friend, one of their colleagues or one of their peers that they were sexually assaulted, and then that person went and told the first sergeant that they were concerned because that person had disclosed that they were sexually assaulted, that would trigger a mandated report by the first sergeant through the chain of command, and a mandated report then becomes an unrestricted report automatically according to the prior process. But now, as of November 2021, even in certain situations, an individual can maintain a restricted report even when they otherwise might not have under the previous rules. And mandated reporters. The folks that I just talked about are individuals who are required to make a report if they hear information about a sexual assault, and they're listed here. You can see it's commanders, folks in the chain of command, including supervisors, first sergeants and senior enlisted advisors, instructors except at USAFA, and law enforcement, including security forces, both on and off duty and on and off site. So those are the folks that if they hear about a sexual assault having been alleged, they are mandated to make a report. And then based on the report and the level of confidentiality that the victim wants to maintain, independent investigation may then be initiated afterward. So this is what an independent investigation looks like. It occurs when an MCIO is investigating a sexual assault and the victim has not filed an unrestricted report, or the victim is ineligible to file a report with the SAPR office. A third party discloses the assault to a mandated reporter, as I mentioned in the example earlier, and declination of victim non-participation in investigation. In other words, an individual says, even though my chain of command found out about this sexual assault, I want to maintain a restricted report. I want to maintain my confidentiality. I don't want to participate in an investigation into the offense. Okay, so as leaders, since this is the Tier 2 training, it's important for us to understand that retaliation meaning taking action against an individual who reports a sexual assault, is not tolerated. It's against the UCMJ and a violation of a person's civil rights, and not something that we would do in our Air Force, where we're trying to create that green environment on the continuum of harm of dignity and respect where everyone feels supported. So leadership does have a role in supporting victims, and they are there for reporting and resources for retaliation. And retaliation, as I said, it's when a member takes or threatens to take a negative personal action or wrongfully withholds or threatens to withhold a favorable personal action with the intent to retaliate against a person to discourage them from reporting, planning to report a criminal offense, or protected communication. That's before or after the fact. So if someone says, I'm going to go and make a report of sexual assault, and leadership, someone in the chain of command, uses a form of retaliation, that is a violation and is not tolerated in our Air Force. Plus, it's just not good order and conduct. We want to keep all of our people safe. Okay, so like all Air Force trainings, I told you what I was going to tell you, then I told you, now I'm telling you what I told you, and you should be able at the end of that to identify the differences between consent, assault, and harassment based on our definitions, talk about the rights an individual has, identify individual and leaders' roles, recognize leaders' roles in helping sexual assault and sexual harassment victims access resources, and identifying the role of leadership in supporting victims and addressing retaliation. So it looks like we're to the end. However, there's another short section that we'll talk about, which is just additional information about sexual assault program in the Air Force, so we'll move on to those now. These are the objectives that we'll cover in these. We already talked about the continuum of harm. We're going to talk a little bit about some special sort of topics associated with sexual assault, including male victimization, and we're going to talk about how we can apply intervention and wingman prevention techniques, and what leaders can do to contribute to readiness and safety. All right, so as I showed you in the earlier graphic, the continuum of harm is a long list of behaviors, and they're behaviors that cross a person's line, right? As a wingman, it's our job to take care of our fellow wingmen, to be a capital A airman and take care of our fellow Air Force members. But there are things that sometimes interfere with our desire or our willingness to intervene if we see something going on that crosses our line that makes us feel uncomfortable, that we think is inappropriate in our environment. And so primary prevention efforts strive to stop sexual harassment and assault before they occur, but if it gets to the point where something is going on and we need to intervene, this is how we go through that process. For those of you who have been around for a minute, you might remember Green Dot from back in 2016 and 2017, where we spent 90 minutes talking just about the 3Ds, direct, delegate, and distract, and talking about barriers to intervening and what we needed to do to get around those. That's all now been distilled, because you've heard it many times, down to this single slide. I'm going to give you a quick example, and then we'll move on through that. But again, this is something that every airman should have as one of their sort of standard tools in their bag of tricks to intervene if they see something that makes them uncomfortable, that crosses their line in the workplace or outside, where they think someone might be at risk of being harmed. So here's an example. I'm at breakfast at IHOP with my family, having my Rudy Tooty Fresh and Fruity breakfast, and in the booth next to me, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is aggressively knife-handing his partner and saying, "I'm going to kill you when we get home." So that crosses my line. It makes me feel unsafe, and so I need to intervene. As a good wingman, as a good airman, as a person who's living the core values, I need to intervene. It's my job to intervene. So I could intervene in one of three ways using the 3Ds. I could intervene directly by distracting the situation, or by delegating to another. In this example, a direct intervention would be I would walk up to Dwayne and I would get in his face and I'd say, "Hey, you, The Rock, get your damn hands off her," right? I could do that. But because I have a personal barrier against getting, my behind kicked by The Rock, I might not choose a direct intervention, so I might choose another route. I could choose to delegate to someone else who might be better suited to intervene there. I could get on the cell, call up my buddy John Cena and say, "Hey John, The Rock is acting crazy over here at the IHOP. Get over here and help me out, man." And that would be a way to delegate to someone else to intervene to keep the third party safe. Or I could use a distraction technique. "Oh, hey, you're Dwayne, you're The Rock, I love you, you're so amazing, I want your autograph, can I get a selfie with you?" Any of that kind of stuff would be a distraction that would defuse the tension of the situation and potentially keep the potential victim safe. So those are the 3Ds that I could use to intervene. But people don't always do that. And the reason that people don't always do that is because there are barriers to intervening. And those barriers exist on 3 levels. There's the personal barrier, the institutional barrier, and the social barrier. Personal barriers, like I said, I don't want to get my face smashed in by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So my personal barrier against being hurt might prevent me from taking a direct action. But then, despite my barrier, I find a way around it and do some other of the 3Ds, like delegate or distract. A social barrier could be, Dwayne and I are actually buddies from way back. You didn't know this, but The Rock is a tech sergeant and we went to tech school together. And so I have a close social relationship with him and I don't want to harm our social relationship by intervening. That could be a social barrier, but I'd still have to find a way around it. And thirdly, our organizational or institutional barriers. Actually didn't know this, but Dwayne got promoted. Now he's Colonel Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and I'm just a slick sleeve airman basic. And institutionally, I'm concerned about trying to intervene with a colonel when I'm just an airman basic. And despite that, I still need to use one of the 3Ds. In this case, delegate would probably be a good one in order to intervene. That's what wingman intervention is. That's what we learned for 90 minutes back in Green Dock. I distilled it down to about 3 minutes here, so hopefully everyone understands what it's our job to do as wingmen to intervene. So one of the sort of special topics that was discussed in the Congressional Review of Sexual Harassment Programs in the Department of Defense is the lack of focus on male victimization, especially since in our Air Force and across the forces, males make up the vast majority of the population of members. And so a special topic within sexual assault discussion is male victimization. You can see facts listed up here, and there will be a few more on the next slide. But according to the slide, 10% of men in the country have suffered trauma from sexual assault on some level. Male victims are more likely than female victims to report there were multiple perpetrators, and there are certain other factors in the military that might impact a person's risk to sexual assault, sort of a social standard of being macho, being in power, being in control, being a strong combatant, that kind of thing, can sometimes run contrary to the way that individuals want to be treated. So there are some facts about male victimization. This second slide, you can see there are some resources that are available for male survivors, including the ones that are listed here. And as you'll see on the previous slide, they said about 10% of males report some form of sexual trauma. But the 1 in 6 organization bumps that number up to as much as about 17 or 18%. So whatever the case, whatever the exact numbers are, the CDC does its own research. The fact is that men are assaulted as well, and in our Air Force we have more men than women. It's just a simple fact. So the straight numbers might be skewed because of that. And it's important to also note that often there's a bias towards assuming a person that's a victim is a female. If we do scenarios and I said Major Hunt sexually assaulted Sergeant Jones, people in their mind automatically almost assume that Major Hunt is a male and Sergeant Jones is a female. But the truth is males are victims as well. Another key piece of information that hasn't been trained particularly effectively previously in previous years is a sexual trauma response, and the fact that any sexual trauma response is okay, right? An individual who may not in the moment that they're being sexually assaulted scream no or fight back or do something to indicate that they don't consent is a perfectly normal sexual trauma response, as is someone fighting, kicking, and screaming and yelling, right? And long-term responses are just as varied. They can be physical, they can be physiological, they can be psychological, they can be emotional, and any response that an individual has is appropriate to their level of trauma and grief, and is what the SAPR office, the victim advocates, and counseling might provide support for an individual. One other key piece of information, remember in the suicide training we talked a lot about risk and protective factors, and we're not talking about them much in the sexual assault portion of the training for the simple fact that they're very, very similar. Most of this risk and protective factors for sexual assault are the same as the ones for suicide, including, as you remember, we talked about risk factors being something that you can't see, that you have to have a relationship with a person to know about, and some of those things might be ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences. Something that happened in a person's childhood may make them more likely to be a victim of sexual assault in the future. And adverse childhood experiences can be multiple things, including sexual abuse, neglect, household challenges, divorce. There's a wide variety of things that can be considered ACEs, but not every individual responds to trauma the same. So for some folks, what might be an adverse childhood experience that might have a negative impact, for others, it may not impact them in the same way. And trauma-informed care shifts our focus on to taking care of the individual in a way that is sensitive to their trauma, whatever their trauma may be, whether it's past trauma or recent trauma. So you can see some of the resources that are available listed on the screen here. These are resources that are available to victims of sexual assault, and they're all listed here. The DoD Safe Helpline is an... Okay.
On the slide, sorry.
On this slide?
Yeah.
Okay. So I can just sort of start this slide again,
Yeah.
and I'll go short.
Yeah.
Are you ready now?
Yes.
Okay. There are multiple resources available for individuals who have been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. You can see some of them listed here, including the national helplines and crisis lines. It's important to have national numbers because individuals come from across 30 states in the 301st Fighter Wing, and we may not know, as a prevention office or a SAPR office, what resources are available locally in California or Nebraska, but the national resources that are listed here are available to anyone, anywhere, at any time. So those resources are important and can be used by anyone. So, in the second portion, we talked about what leaders can do to prevent behaviors along the continuum of harm, about how we can engage in actions that help prevent sexual violence and improve the climate within units. We defined male victimization. We talked about leadership roles, and we recognized and explained how leaders can contribute to readiness and safety. So in order to get credit for today's training, and since this video training is happening at the end of the year for individuals who weren't able to attend an in-person training, you'll have to do two things, and those are coming up on these next two slides, well, on this slide and the following slide. In order to get credit for attendance at today's training, for having watched both the suicide prevention and SAPR Tier 2 trainings, you need to scan the QR code that you see on your screen now and fill out a couple of simple questions. The most important ones are your name and your email address, as well as the passcode to which you belong. The form lists several maintenance passcodes, but then the bottom passcode is all other passcodes. So if you don't fall into one of the maintenance group passcodes, then just select the bottom radio button to be included in all other passcodes. So that's part one that you must complete. And part two is if you're taking this training via video and didn't get a chance to take it in person, you need to scan this QR code and complete the required short 2-question survey about today's training. This just shows us that you were paying attention to the training and that you watched it and have some thoughtful reflection on the content, but it's very short. It should take you no more than 3 minutes to complete this survey. Thank you so much for attending today's training. I appreciate your focus, your attention, and your patience. And I remind you that just as we discussed in suicide prevention, as we alluded to in the SAPR discussion, it's really all of our jobs to ensure that we have an environment of safety and health and dignity and respect for all of our individuals. We signed up to do this job. We signed up to have each other's back. We raised our right hand and said, I will kill for you and I will die for you at the end of the day. And that's why we want to create an environment where every individual in our Air Force feels safe to function within their workplace, feels respected, feels like they have dignity, and feels like they're an important part of a team. I encourage you to take what you've learned today as leaders out into your units, to lead by example, to show some vulnerability, to talk about how help seeking is okay, and to do everything that you can to make sure that all of our members, civilian, active duty, reservists, ARTs, AGRs, whoever they are that wear the uniform, previously wore the uniform, or now work as Department of Air Force civilians, are all safe and protected and lead on to a better, safer Air Force for us all. Thank you and have a good day.